There we go. That's better, isn't it? Hello, folks. I've got a wee green light on the microphone. So hopefully you can hear me all there. For anybody who's joining me there in YouTube land, I'm Doc Sloan. Welcome to my science fiction station, the Doghouse, as it's also known. And we're on chapter 39 of our Dune book club today. Pushing on as we're doing, we're into book 3 of Dune and we're heading towards the end. So 48 chapters in total, and we're up at 39. So not too many more to go. And I've been piling away at this to sort of try and get it finished for this evening, because I've had an awful lot of, I suppose, extraneous reading to do this week. And I just finished, I don't know if anybody's read it, The Shock of the Fall, by Nathan Filer. It's part of the GCSE syllabus here, so I was having to read it for a student, along with The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. So a bit of heavy reading. I thought both books were quite good, to be honest with you. Though I did think The Shock of the Fall was very derivative. What's the book I'm thinking on? Mark Haddon's The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Something like that, you know. So there we go. So that's just an awful lot of heavy reading to do this week, apart outside of our book club. There's Chaya saying, Shalom, Doc. Thanks for moving back to Thursdays. No problem, Chaya. I was supposed to be staying on Thursdays. And just as usual, life being what it is here at the minute, I'm hoping to sort of try to get to some kind of regular slot, but it never seems to happen. But yeah, no, we're trying. My weekends are a wee bit busy at the minute, so the Friday, Saturday, Sunday doesn't tend to suit me either. But yeah, no problem at all. I'm going to do my best to try and keep it on Thursdays until we're finished the Dune book club. And then I hopefully will try and do something weekly, but I'd like to try and get back into making the odd video or two, because they've I think I've been saying this, they've kind of piled up in terms of the content that I've been wanting to sort of create for the station. And I was talking a wee bit, I'm wanting to do a wee episode on the word for world is forest. If you're a Dune fan, it's an absolute must. I think you'd find it a very similar book, a slightly different perspective. But certainly an example of ecological science fiction, you know. So no problem, Chaya. Thanks very much for joining. It's good to have you back, by the way. Oh, that just reminds me, before we get started today, let's see. I got another letter from Cynthia, and I just thought I'd just give this a wee bit of a read before we got started. It was to do with just chatting about whether the Baron in the previous chapter, whether he was a misogynist. We were getting various aspects of his character, but the one that we were kind of noticing was in relation to the women. Kill all the women. And I was just wondering about his misogyny. Chaya's taken the trouble. Not Chaya, sorry, Cynthia. There she is, Cynthia. Hi, Doc. Hi, Chaya. Sorry, Cynthia, I was just saying that you've taken the trouble to write me a letter. If you don't mind, as usual, I'm just going to read it to recap, because there's some very good points. I'll just tear through this quickly. Regarding chapter 38, Doc, I wanted to respond to your question from the last session about the Baron's attitude towards women in this chapter. I definitely appreciate your observation that the Baron has terrible memories of the defeat on Arrakis a couple of years earlier, and the importance of the fact that he misses Piter as mentat and companion. I hadn't noticed these details in previous readings, and it helped me fit some pieces together. There's always something you don't notice in Dune. It's such a dense book, isn't it? In one sense, the entire chapter appears to be a completion of the Baron's evening of sexual entertainments. His planned romp with the slave boy ended all too quickly with the discovery of the poisoned dart. So, still aroused, he storms through the halls to interrupt the seemingly unfair and therefore undeserved private pleasures of others in his household. Samuta, pyramid chess, slave girls. The Baron asserts himself, demanding obedience to seemingly flippant requests in order to bring the guards or any nearby men, for that matter, into submission. But they're not young enough for this paedophile, so he rages all the more. Feyd is a special case. He's not only a rival and they Baron complicit in the assassination attempt, but also a former plaything. I think there are enough hints in the text of Dune to suggest that the Baron used the young Feyd as a sexual toy. See the ending phrase of chapter 2, when the Baron tells Feyd, "Send for food, my darling, we will eat before we retire." And at the end of chapter 38, Feyd thinks, I must remember this night, and remembering it, I must remember other nights. That's the wee bit I was questioning. What did he mean by that? Excuse me. Upon seeing Feyd, the Baron regrets the passing of time that has transformed his darling nephew into a man who prefers the pleasures of women. Shorn of ready alternatives, he now wants the young nobleman under his sway once more, somehow, so he can have the sexual release he wanted earlier in the evening. The scenario of a failed assassination attempt presents new possibilities for satisfaction. Piter's memory guides the Baron. He can punish his nephew in a way Piter would enjoy. He can become Piter. Back in chapter 2, we heard the Baron contrast his bloody proclivities with Piter's sadism. He caused pain out of necessity, but Piter took a positive delight in it. In the same conversation, the Baron said, "My dear Piter, your pleasures are what tie you to me. How can I object to that? I merely wish my nephew to observe this about you." Feyd watches the plotting and machinations of the duo and calls the Baron the old monster in his mind. At the end of chapter 38 and the start of chapter 39, the roles of Baron, Piter, and Feyd shift from what they were in chapter 2. The Baron now plays the role of Piter, taking pleasure in killing. The nay Baron Feyd plays the Baron, struggling for control and a future. And Hawat now plays the role that Feyd did, inwardly labelling the Baron a dangerous pig. Hawat will likely see the killing in the slave quarters since the Baron put him in charge of watching Feyd's every move. In that grisly event, the old mentat will see many layers of the Harkonnen power struggle, but his simplified label, like that made by the young Feyd, conveys overconfidence and limited vision, as we will see in the upcoming chapter. The failed assassination attempt put Feyd in a vulnerable position, allowing the continuation of other, more subtle power discussions. By demanding that he kill the women in the pleasure wing with his own hands, Feyd will be less likely to want to bring a Bene Gesserit truthsayer into House Harkonnen. That's a very good point. Although Herbert doesn't provide details, it's possible that the Baron has found out about Margot's seduction of Feyd and is suspicious of the results. He knows that he himself was once seduced by a female and may recognize the hand of the Bene Gesserit behind that. This, at the very least, has contributed to his distrust of them and their motives, a generalized distrust with far-reaching consequences. It seems that he has never allowed any representatives of the Bene Gesserit Guild to serve as one of his counselors, just Tleilax's mentats. He doesn't want the Nay Baron to change that. While I'm not sure I would call him a simple misogynist, his strident sexual and political prejudices show up here as real limitations. By taking on the role of Piter in this scene and virulently rejecting any female influence, perhaps the Baron represents the tension that exists between these two guilds. Certainly, though, Feyd will never forgive him for this incriminating punishment, and the Baron might have had a more sophisticated understanding of religion. And the Baron might have had a more sophisticated understanding of religion and the meaning of a new prophet on Arrakis had he devoted more attention to understanding who the Bene Gesserit were and how they operated. Thanks, as always, Cynthia. There we go. No, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you very much indeed. That's an excellent letter and some really good points. The thing that I wasn't actually sure of, to be honest with you, because as you point out, it's not explicitly made clear, is that has the Baron sexually abused Feyd? And from my reading your letter there, I would go with yes now, actually thinking about the points that you've made. Prior to that, I wasn't sure. And I think, I wasn't quite, I think there's definitely something to do there with his, I suppose, as you put it, his sexual proclivities. But that's a really great letter. Thank you very much indeed. And I hope, again, as always, you don't mind me reading it out. Chaya's saying, hi, I missed y'all. And there's Talios still saying, evening, Doc. Howdy, Cynthia. Hiya, Chaya. Forgive my bad spell. No, we're never worried about that here, are we, Babs? Nice. Thank you very much for joining us. And there's Cynthia saying, hi, Talios. So there we go. Thank you as always, Cynthia. I love getting letters like that. I really do. As you point out, when we're hitting things in the book, going through detail, sometimes by the time I'm through this, I'm pretty knackered, to be honest with you. And my brain's not fully 100%. But there's always something that you miss. And I just thought that was very, very good. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. So we're here at chapter 39, and this is I suppose, up close and personal look at the Baron and Hawat and the conversation that they have. There's nobody else in this chapter. Let me just grab the book, actually. Sorry. And as you said, it's sort of leading on from the previous events. And we're going to find out a fair bit here about, I suppose, in a way, it's kind of tidying up a few of our mysteries and loose ends from within the book, but particularly what was discussed before about the Sardaukar. We're going to get that here. And I suppose it's more plans within plans. And we're also going to get quite an outrageous body count in this chapter. We had all the women in the pleasure wing killed, and then a few guards here and there, and a slave boy, etc. in the previous chapter. But we're going to get some statistics, if you like, large numbers on deaths, I suppose, and how the information works within the Baron's household. And I suppose it looks like even the Atreides, whenever they were looking into the Fremen, weren't getting things quite correct. So it's a dialogue-heavy chapter. It's a very short chapter, which is actually the reason why I was able to get it done for today. So let's start with our epigraph. Deep in the human unconsciousness is a pervasive need for a logical universe that makes sense. But the real universe is always one step beyond logic. From the sayings of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. And of course, logic, if you want to think about it, is the focus of the school of the mentats. Paperweight. There we go. Excellent. So, as I said, it's a dialogue-heavy chapter, and there's no real scene set up in this chapter. We're not given a setting, if you like. It slightly emerges as we read through. So, Thufir Hawat, we start off with his thoughts here, telling us, "I've sat across from many rulers of the great houses, but never seen a more gross and degenerate pig than this one," he told himself. So again, I suppose gross and degenerate pig is how we're supposed to see the Baron here. And there's one other thing, by the way, guys, I thinking about it from last week that I didn't point out, was the way the Baron's thoughts and Feyd's thoughts kind of matched up quite a lot in the previous chapter, which I suppose I should maybe address. They really are almost, almost on the same page, if you know what I mean. It's almost like mind reading. I'll give you an example. "Get to the point, you old fool," Feyd-Rautha thought. "You think of me as an old fool," the Baron said. "I must dissuade you of that." It's almost like the Baron's, almost like there's a telepathy going on. And just what it, I suppose, just quickly stepping back to that, I thought it happened a fair bit in the previous chapter. And how do I put it? I suppose it reminded me a bit of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, if anybody knows the play, where one of the characters tosses a coin and it always comes up heads, isn't it? Which basically tells him that I'm a character in a play. And I just got something of that sense. I don't know if it was the writing where, I'm thinking this, and then the next character says exactly what that person's thinking. I just thought it was a wee bit too convenient. And made me just think of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. But there, we just thought I'd drop that in before we got going. So it's not quite the same here. So we have the Baron. I said that's a lot of dialogue, so here we go. "You may speak plainly with me, Hawat," he rumbled. So we get a wee bit of a description here. Let's see. So the Baron rumbled. He leaned back in his suspensor chair, his eyes in their folds of fat boring into Hawat. Hawat, the old mentat, looked down at the table between him and the Baron, noting the opulence of the grain, we've had this table described previously, I think in chapter 2. Even this was a factor to consider in assessing the Baron. Oh, sorry, folks, the dogs are going nutty at the doghouse there. Ladies! Oh, there we go. So even this was a factor to consider in assessing the Baron. Let me see. I wonder if we have that table. Oops, way back to chapter 2. I thought it was right at the very start there. Bear with me a wee second. Well, there's quite a lot in this, isn't there? Something to do with the wood. I'll tell you what, I'll not waste time looking for it. I suppose that's the point of these books, is to find something quite quickly. Oh dear, it's getting warm in here. So the opulence of the grain, even this is a factor to consider in assessing the Baron, as were the red walls of his private conference room. And we're told there's the faint, sweet herb scent that hung in the air, which masks a deeper musk. So something hidden. So all of these things about this room, this table, the colouring of the walls, all of these things are factors. The smell, even, when considering the Baron. So he still hasn't spoken at this point. The Baron says, "You didn't have me send that warning to Raban as an idle whim." And we'll catch up with this in a wee bit at the end of the chapter, I suppose. So Hawat, we're told, his leathery old face remained impassive, betraying none of the loathing that he felt. "I suspect many things, Lord." So the Baron says, "Yes, well, here we go. I wish to know how Arrakis figures in your suspicions about Salusa Secundus. It is not enough that you say to me the Emperor is in a ferment about some association between Arrakis and his mysterious prison planet. Now, I rushed the warning out to Raban only because the courier had to leave on that Highliner. You said there could be no delay. Well and good. But now I will have an explanation." So quite a lengthy wee bit of dialogue there. Hawat's thoughts here are he babbles too much. And we get, I suppose, this comparison here. He's not like Leto, who could tell me a thing with the lift of an eyebrow, or the wave of a hand, nor like the old Duke, who could express an entire sentence in the way he accented a single word. Pardon me. This is our clod. Destroying him will be a service to mankind. So I think that's pretty much Hawat's goals there. Destroying him would be a service to mankind. The Baron again continues here. "You will not leave here until I've had a full and complete explanation." So how it goes, "You speak too casually of Salusa Secundus." Of course, he has spoken casually, hasn't he? The Baron, he's spoken a little bit of his idea to Count Casimir Fenring. Sorry, let me just tidy that up a bit there. There we go. Keep me roughly in the middle of the screen. So the Baron says, "It's a penal colony. The worst riffraff in the galaxy are sent to Salusa Secundus. What else do we need to know?" So Hawat replies that conditions on the prison planet are more oppressive than anywhere else. You hear that the mortality rate amongst new prisoners is higher than 60%. You hear all this and don't ask questions? The Baron says, "Well, the Emperor doesn't permit the great houses to inspect his prison, but he hasn't seen my dungeons either." Hawat says, "And curiosity about Salusa Secundus is discouraged." Puts a wee finger to his lips. The Baron says, "So he's not proud of some of the things he must do there." And that's an exclamation mark there. There's a bit of a reaction there, I think, isn't there? which suggests that the Baron's not proud of some of the things he does in his dungeon. Hawat allowed himself the faintest of smiles to touch his dark lips. Eyes glinted in the glow tube light as he stared at the Baron. And you've never wondered where the Emperor gets his Sardaukar. So we're told the Baron pursed his fat lips, gave his features the look of a pouting baby, and his voice carried a tone of petulance. Why, he recruits, that is to say, there are levies, and he enlists from, and he's cut off here by Hawat, which will continue to occur. In fact, they both cut each other off a fair bit, but Hawat does a fair bit of it, and his response here is quite good. Fah! The stories you hear about the exploits of the Sardaukar, they're not rumors, are they? Those are first-hand accounts from the limited number of survivors who fought against the Sardaukar. And of course, the Sardaukar, excellent fighting men, no doubt of it. But I think my own legions, and again he's cut off by Hawat, who snarls. Quite a good insult here against the Baron. A pack of holiday excursionists by comparison. You think I don't know why the Emperor turned against House Atreides? And the Baron tells him that this is not a realm open to your speculation, which is a warning and a threat. And of course, reading this in a linear fashion, I wrote, why not? He's a mentat. Why would you, why is certain areas not open to his speculation? And I suppose it's probably to do with how the Baron controls Hawat, or thinks that he controls Hawat. So Hawat's thoughts here, is it possible that even he doesn't know what motivated the Emperor in this? Hawat says this: any area is open to my speculation if it does what you've hired me to do. I'm a mentat. You do not withhold information or computation lines from a mentat. Interesting, I suppose, the way Hawat describes himself here. And we'll see this throughout this chapter. So you've hired me. Sorry, just getting my thoughts together there. I would say he's a slave. I don't know. Hawat is probably a slave mentat. The suggestion is here that he's in the Harkonnen's employ. And maybe that's the case because he thinks that House Atreides has been wiped out. But he has this poison antidote thing going. I wouldn't say that he's been hired. Maybe that's just the way that Hawat puts it, to soothe himself, if you see what I mean. But you've hired me to do. I don't think that he's quite in the Baron's employ, if you like. The Baron for a long minute stared at him. Say what you must say, mentat. So Hawat does. The Padishah Emperor turned against House Atreides because the Duke's war masters, Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho, had trained a fighting force, a small fighting force, to within a hair as good as the Sardaukar. Some of them were even better. And the Duke was in a position to enlarge his force, to make it every bit as strong as the Emperor's. Now, I don't know about you guys. I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I've just written down that this doesn't make sense. And it's a kind of a non sequitur. So the idea, based on what Hawat says here, is the Emperor turns against House Atreides because they've got a formidable army. We're told it's a small army. It's nowhere near as big. A small fighting force to within. The Duke was in a position to enlarge his force. No, he wasn't. If we're assuming that what we mean here is that to get control of the Fremen, if you see what I mean, I have to think that the House Atreides is only looking at the Fremen as a potential core, if you like, for their army, a core of troops from the point where they're going to Arrakis. Otherwise, I would suggest that the Fremen aren't available to House Atreides. So, the way I've put it here is Leto gets troops, calls of distrust sent to Arrakis, where there's more troops to recruit, has Hawat retconned this, is the way I've put it. Because it just doesn't quite add up. If that's the logic, then the Emperor wouldn't move against House Atreides unless they, I suppose, gone to Arrakis where there is this. And again, they're ignorant of it. There's something about that statement that just doesn't add up, and it doesn't quite make sense. I'd love to, as I said, love to hear your opinions about it. There's Cynthia saying, in chapter 2, the Baron complains that Piter talks too much. Here, Hawat thinks that the Baron babbles. Maybe not important, but a curious shift in the relationship between the Baron and his mentat. There's Lord Crunk saying, hello's all. Hi, Lord Crunk, thanks for joining us. Well, the thing I was kind of thinking about, something along the lines of what you're saying, Cynthia, is that the Baron's lessons that we were looking at, a few of them in the previous chapter, and again, it's chapter 2 where we can see him educating Feyd, isn't it? I thought it was a little bit paradoxical that he wasn't seemingly following his own advice, if you see what I mean. Piter talks too much. I miss it. I miss Piter talking too much. And the question is, I suppose, is the Baron babbling here, really? I don't think so. I think he's been quite succinct, to be honest with you. It's possibly some of Hawat's prejudice coming through. Yeah, I just thought that little bit there didn't make sense. The reasoning for the Emperor moving against House Atreides is that the Duke was, he had a small fighting force, but the Duke was in a position to enlarge his force to make it every bit as strong as the Emperor's, and I don't know about that at all. In fact, the figures are going to be a bit interesting here as well. So it's just that didn't make sense. Some of what they're suggesting is non sequitur. It doesn't follow. And again, I'm just wondering how much is this the way Hawat's phrasing things, So the Baron weighs this disclosure. What has Arrakis to do with this? Hawat replies, it provides a pool of recruits already conditioned to the bitterest survival training. You cannot mean the Fremen. I mean the Fremen, says Hawat. Ha! Says the Baron. Then why warn Rabban? There cannot be more than a handful of Fremen left after the Sardaukar pogrom and Rabban's oppression. So Hawat continues to stare at him here, let the cogs work, if you like. Not more than a handful, says the Baron. Big exclamation mark. Rabban has killed 6,000 of them last year alone. Hawat still stares at him. And the year before that, it was 9,000. And before they left, the Sardaukar must have accounted for at least 20,000 of them. So that gives us a little one of my little skulls here. I have 35,000 Fremen killed. There we go. So that, just to start off with that there, and we always like to point out, we don't see the little people die in Dune, do we? So there's 35,000 wiped out. There should be only a handful left. And again, we'll see this whenever we get to Dune Messiah, the little chat, the discussion about statistics. How it says, what are Rabban's troop losses for the past 2 years? The Baron rubbed his jowls. Well, he's been recruiting heavily, to be sure. His agents make rather extravagant promises and cut off a third time. He's cut off here by how I think he's definitely babbling there. How it says, shall we say 30,000 in round numbers? So there we go. There's another little skull. I've got 30,000 of Rabban's men. There we have. We have 65,000 people dead in this chapter already, and we're not off the second page. So shall we say 30,000 in round numbers? That would seem a little high, says the Baron. I think there's a bit of embarrassment coming out here. Quite the contrary, says Hawat. I can read between the lines of Rabban's report as well as you can, and you certainly must have understood my reports from our agents. The Baron says, Arrakis is a fierce planet. Storm losses. Again, he's cut off. We both know the figure for storm accretion. And the Baron, okay, so what if he lost 30,000? He demanded. And blood, we're told, darkened his face. He's embarrassed by this. So Hawat says, by your own count, he's killed 15,000 over 2 years whilst losing twice that number. You say the Sardaukar accounted for another 20,000, possibly a few more. And I've seen the transportation manifests for their return from Arrakis. If they killed 20,000, they lost almost 5 for 1. Why won't you face these figures, Baron, and understand what they mean? So, in light of what we've just had, 5 to 1 losses on 20,000 is 100,000 Sardaukar, which is interesting. So far we've got 35,000 Fremen dead, 30,000 of Raban's men, and 100,000 of the Sardaukar. I wonder if we ever figured out how big a Sardaukar legion was. A Roman legion is 5,500 men, for example, but it has auxiliaries and various other groups attached to it. So it's an awful lot of a large number of legions worth of men, if you like. And it suggests, yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? The Fremen certainly have killed an awful lot. How has nobody noticed this? I suppose is the thing that we have to ask, So, of course, the Baron spoke in a coldly measured cadence. This is your job, mentat. What do they mean? So, it's your job to tell me what they mean, I suppose. So Hawat says, I gave you Duncan, Idaho's head count on the siege he visited. It all fits. If they had 250 such siege communities, their population would be about 5 million. My best estimate is they had at least twice that many communities. You scatter your population on such a planet. 10 million? And the Baron's jowls quivered in amazement. I like the way his jowls are going in this chapter. At least just about 20,000 people per siege, is if we do the math on that, and that lines up with the figures of Siege Tabar, I suppose, arriving to see Jessica transmute the water of life in the previous chapter, and of course it also lines up with, I suppose, that the Atreides Duncan, Idaho figured there was about 10,000 per siege, I think, as we recall. So it shows that even his estimates were wrong. And it must be pretty hard to put a figure on the Fremen. So the Baron pursed his fat lips, beady eyes stared without wavering at Hawat. And he asks a question here in his thoughts. Is this true mentat computation? How could this be and no one suspect? It's a good question, isn't it? I think we just asked it. Hawat says, we haven't even cut heavily into their birth rate growth figure. We've just weeded out some of their less successful specimens, leaving the strong to grow stronger, just like on Salusa Secundus. And the Baron barks, Salusa Secundus, what has this to do with the Emperor's prison planet? A man who survives Salusa Secundus starts out being tougher than most others. When you add the very best in military training, nonsense, shouts the Baron. By your argument, I could recruit from among the Fremen after the way they've been oppressed by my nephew. So Hawat's mild voice here, don't you oppress any of your troops? Well, but oppression is a relative thing. Your fighting men are much better off than those around them, eh? They see unpleasant alternatives to being soldiers of the Baron, hey? So the Baron fell silent, eyes unfocused, the possibilities. Question, had Raban unwittingly given House Harkonnen its ultimate weapon? Presently he said, how could you be sure of the loyalty of such recruits? I suppose this is interesting that the Baron's thinking, oh, I could use the Fremen here too. And I'd argue it's probably something that anybody would think that's maybe looking at this situation, but how would you get their loyalty? How would you get control over them? It would only be through religious means, wouldn't it? I suppose. Cynthia's saying, I agree that Hawat's narrative about a small fighting force in House Atreides doesn't fit what we've learned about that family or its aims earlier in the story. The Sardaukar killed Duncan, and there are other reasons for Paul's superiority when fighting the Fremen. Lord Crunk said the Baron told Ravan to feed. Always, there's a lot of food metaphors with the Baron, isn't there? Yeah, it is one of those. It's just an odd little. It's a very little thing, isn't it? And if we just take a moment to think about it, it doesn't quite make sense. As I said, it's just in terms of it's the logic of it. It doesn't follow. Where were okay? Well, yes, oppression is a relative thing. Your fighting men are much better off than those around you. I suppose this is a similar idea to. I suppose this in cases like fighting men, but the idea of if you're a slave in the Roman Empire, for example, you're probably a lot better off than a free person living in, say, Germania or something like that. Unpleasant alternatives to being soldiers of the Baron. How could you be sure of? Sorry, just backing up a wee bit. How could you be sure of the loyalty of such recruits? So we've heard a wee bit about this before. This is quite important. I think that this. I suppose some of the stuff talks about Herbert's ideas about the army, etc. There's more to it than what's here. But here we go. I would take them in small groups, not larger than platoon strength. I'd remove them from their oppressive situation and isolate them with a training cadre of people who understood their background, preferably people who had preceded them from the same oppressive situation. Then I'd fill them with the mystique that their planet had really been a secret training ground to produce such superior beings as themselves. And all the while, I'd show them what such superior beings could earn. Rich living, beautiful women, fine mansions, whatever they desired. And the Baron's beginning to nod, the way the Sardaukar live at home. So Hawat says the recruits come to believe in time that such a place as Salusa Secundus is justified because it produced them, the elite. The commonest Sardaukar trooper lives a life in many respects as exalted as that of any member of a great house. Such an idea, whispered the Baron. Hawat says, you begin to share my suspicions. And the Baron says, where did such a thing start? Now, I suppose just quickly before we move on with that, this is the whole kind of nature of the military. I said there is more to it in this, but the idea of an elite, a certain sense of mysticism that builds up around them, legends, myths, this kind of thing. And we get soldiers like this in history, I suppose. We have the Spartans, for example, as a military society. And the Spartan reputation is pretty good. If you think about the Battle of Thermopylae, where you've got Leonidas and 300 Spartans and a whole bunch of other guys there to fight with them. That really enshrines that reputation. A few years later, you have a bunch of a whole lot of Spartans at the Battle of Plataea, and their presence terrorizes their enemy. Just crap. Here they are, and it's kind of the same thing with the 10,000, though it's a bit different, I suppose. But the 10,000 are pretty much made up of half Spartans and half Athenians, and again their reputation is mighty. But you get warrior, elite warrior groups in all sorts of cultures. They're all over the place. Almost every country has an elite special forces, this kind of thing, and you'll get that same kind of particularly tough training. A mystique about them, and only the finest before you go to get yourself killed, that kind of thing, Fact and non-verbal. I fact nothing like that old-timey religion, absolutely. And it's kind of it takes almost the military and does it. It almost makes it into a religion in a funny way, a cult almost, if you like. And again, there's things like that in the Roman Empire. You have the cult of Mithras, for example, which is heavily based on Zoroastrianism. So it's a point that Herbert makes. He'll go on later about the homosexual nature of the army, etc. So some of the stuff we have discussed before, particularly with Leto, and how it, again, when they were wondering previously, where does the Emperor get the Sardaukar from? This kind of thing. And so this is really feeding this story to the Baron. So that these recruits come to believe it, don't they? That's what we're told. They come to believe in time that it's justified because it produced them. They're the elite. And yeah, I suppose if you can live through all that and end up with a job as a Sardaukar, pardon me, rather than as a prisoner. I think it's been pointed out that prisoners do not make good soldiers, neither do slaves. And you'd imagine that, you'd need to keep a leash on them, wouldn't you? I suppose. But it's the leash is wealth, I think, isn't it? Wealth and luxury. Where did such a thing start, the Baron asks. Now, this is really interesting. Ah, yes. Where did House Corrino originate? This is an odd question for the Dune universe. We don't get a lot of this. Were there people on Salusa Secundus before the Emperor sent his first contingents of prisoners there? Even the Duke Leto, a cousin on the distaff side, never knew for sure. Such questions were not encouraged. Now, the question there that's odd, where did House Corrino originate? So the suggestion, Salusa Secundus, we're told in the terminology of the Imperium, is the third planet of gamma wiping, designated Imperial prison planet after removal of the royal court to Kaitan. So it suggests that if we read that carefully, it doesn't say that the royal court was removed from Salusa Secundus. Designated the Imperial prison planet after removal of the royal court to Kaitan, though that's probably the meaning, but it could be somewhere else. And here we go. Salusa Secunda is homeworld of House Corrino. There we go. And the second stopping point in migrations of the wandering Zen Sunni, Fremen tradition says they were slaves on Salusa Secundus for 9 generations. Take a generation as about 20 years, maybe. So that's about 100, 200 years, maybe. So as much as the question is asked here, where did House Corrino originate? We're told that they originate in the back of the book. Homeworld of House Corrino. So yeah, they've moved their royal court to Kaitan, and the suggestion is some kind of environmental disaster, isn't it? I think if so, Salusa Secundus is their homeworld. What's happened to it to turn it into a hell world? Otherwise, we would assume that the Corrinos are incredibly tough and hard to live on such a world. Let me just catch up with your comments, folks. Factor on purposes. Our elite military personnel become murderers and drug trafficking czars. Murders. China says, yeah, we get a lot of that, I suppose, here too. Arms smugglers and stuff like that. The barons are mercenaries. China says the baron's comment that some areas aren't for Hawat's speculation should have alerted his mental senses that the baron lied about Arrakis. Hawat is wrong way too often. I've got a wee comment about him, about a lie here later. Very good, Chaya. Alerted his mentat senses. Yeah, sorry, not mental. Got you. Thank you. In fact, Hawat's getting old and melodramatic. He is very old. Lord Cromwell, poor Hawat. Where the noble houses originate is one thing. The Bene Gesserit manipulation is the unknown steering factor of the noble lines. It actually made me ask another question there, is that thinking about House Atreides, and that they're a family. Where's all the rest of them? Where's all their cousins and second cousins and third uncles twice removed, etc.? Where are they? And related, let me see. Where was that wee bit? Even Leto didn't. Yeah, even the Duke Leto, a cousin on the distaff side of the Emperor, never knew for sure. So distaff is the female line, for example. The other term within that kind of discussion of hereditary, if you like, is the spear line, which is the male line, which means Leto is related to the Emperor through the female side of the family. Yeah, there's a few kind of problems here, isn't there? Like who would they be? And in terms of having a distaff side, if you see what I mean, it's what you're pointing out, Lord Krog, is with all this Bene Gesserit manipulation of bloodlines, I suppose, how do you look at the distaff side? What, in terms of that branch of the family? It's interesting. I just don't think it's going to be the way we have these characters set up, these families set up. I don't think it's as simple as Frank's. Or I think when we look at it in detail, I suppose, or possible detail, it might break down a wee bit with what Frank's suggesting here. Even the Duke Leto, a cousin on the distaff side, never knew for sure. Such questions were not encouraged, we're told. Yeah, interesting. Eyes glazed with thought. Yes, a very carefully kept secret. They'd use every device of cut off again. Besides, what's there to conceal? Asks Hawat. And it's a very good point that the Padishah Emperor has a prison planet. Yes, he does. Everyone knows this, that he has, and he's cut off. Count Fenring, the Baron blurted. We'll come to that in a wee second. What's there to conceal that the Padishah Emperor has a prison planet? Everyone knows this, that he has. So what's there to conceal, actually? I've worked in a prison, and the answer is plenty. There's plenty to conceal in a prison, to conceal about prisons, if you like. We've a prison not too far from here on the north coast, and it's a real eyesore. It's the one that I worked in. It's goodness, I can't even remember. A prison's a closed environment, pretty much. If there's any naughtiness going on inside, being being committed by guards or prison officers, as they like to be called, between the guards and the people who run the place and the inmates, it's, even if you want police in there to investigate, it's a closed environment. It takes time for you to get in there. This kind of thing. So it's prisons, as much as they are one thing, if you like, it's not often that they're easy to inquire into, if you see what I mean. I actually stopped working there. I was actually employed as a lecturer by the local college at the time, and we had a contract to work there. So I used to teach ICT on different levels to prisoners there, or offenders as they're called, I think, in this country, isn't it? But yeah, I actually left because I was threatened by a prison officer. So I just told him where to go and left. And I went back to teaching my classes outside of the prison. He was a very Gestapo type individual, if you know what I mean. And you get, I would argue, you get two kinds of people in there, certainly within the civilians. But you get who work there. One set are there. They want to punish people, and they're there to punish them. And the other set are, I suppose, they want to rehabilitate people, if you like. So they're two kind of I suppose a lot of the civilians that work in there are more into the rehabilitation. A lot of the guards are more into punishment. Not a great place to work. I didn't mind. I worked there for a year. Very old-fashioned teaching, guerrilla teaching. Wouldn't even let you take in any flash drives or anything like that. Sorry, this is way back when actually flash drives just turned up. So Count Fenring, the Baron blurts out how it broke off, studied the Baron with a puzzled frown. What of Count Fenring? What's this guy got to do with this? Of course, the previous chapter's epigraph start was about Fenring, wasn't it? Another one of my favourite characters, and he's hardly in the book at all. Here we go. At my nephew's birthday, several years ago, this imperial popinjay, Count Fenring, came as an official observer and to conclude a business arrangement between the Emperor and myself. So he's still not giving, clearly in this case, how all the info, is he? How it says so. The Baron, during one of our conversations, I believe I said something about making a prison planet of Arrakis. Fenring, again, he's cut off by Hawat. See, it's very much a motif in this chapter, isn't it? Just interrupting him all the time. What did you say exactly? Exactly? That was quite a while ago. And again, cut off, my Lord Baron. If you wish to make the best use of my services, you must give me adequate information. Wasn't this conversation recorded? There's just again, we've had him just to point it out. Let me just back up a wee bit. Hawat earlier talked about being hired, and here he's talking about his services, I suppose. And of course, you tell me that wasn't this conversation recorded. We know that it was done in this sort of cone of silence, wasn't it? The Baron's face darkened with anger. You're as bad as Piter. I don't like these. And again, he's cut off. Piter is no longer with you, my lord. As to that, whatever did happen to Piter? He became too familiar, too demanding of me. Which is a subtle threat and no information. There, I've put down. This is the bit we were pointing out. I think, the Baron's very much been thinking of Piter. I think the Baron very much misses Piter. And I kind of do too. I think the Baron's never as good without. I think the Baron's tip top when Piter's on the page with him. Yeah, it's a pity we didn't get another Piter de Vries, I think. You're as bad as Piter. I don't like the cut off. Piter is no longer with you, my lord. As to that, whatever did happen to Piter, of course, we all know he's dead. And we know how he died. But that's not what the Baron tells him. He became too familiar, too demanding of me. A bit like you, in other words. How it says, you assure me that you don't waste a useful man. Will you waste me by threats and quibbling? We were discussing what you said to Count Fenring. So we divert him back around here. And we're told that the Baron slowly composes his features, thinking, when the time comes, I'll remember his manner with me. Yes, I will remember. And we get this with the Baron a wee bit, don't we? He kind of stores, I'll remember this. And I think he has a wee moment like this with Piter. And I'm pretty sure he has one with Fenring, I think, as well. So I like this next wee bit with the Baron here. He kind of is quite businesslike. One moment, he thought back to the meeting in the Great Hall, helped to visualize the cone of silence in which they'd stood. I had said something like this. The Emperor knows a certain amount of killing has always been an arm of business. I was referring to our workforce losses. Then I said something about considering another solution to the Arrakis problem, and I said the Emperor's prison planet inspired me to emulate him. Howat's response here is quite good. Witch blood! By the gods, witch blood as a particularly good swear term here. Excuse me, there's my throat going. What did Fenring say? Oh, excuse me. Well, that's when he began questioning about you. So Hawat sits back, eyes closed, and thought, so that's why they've started looking into Arrakis. Well, the thing's done. They must have spies all over Arrakis by now. 2 years. And the Baron, excuse me, but certainly my innocent suggestion that nothing is innocent in an emperor's eyes. And it's not the emperor, by the way, in an emperor's eyes, I thought was quite good. What were your instructions to Rabban? Merely that he should teach Arrakis to fear us, says the Baron. And Hawat shakes his head. You now have 2 alternatives, Baron. Here we go. This is quite... And remember, this is an Atreides mentat, I think, here, but this bit is you can kill all the natives, wipe them out entirely, or... and the Baron interrupts him. Waste an entire workforce? Would you prefer to have the Emperor in those great houses he can still swing behind him, come in here and perform a Kuretaman? Scrape out Gidi Prime like a hollow gourd? He wouldn't dare, says the Baron. Wouldn't he? Says Hawat. So Hawat here is basically proposing genocide. No other word for it. Kill all the natives. Is kill all the people born on that planet. That's what that means. So that's... You've got two alternatives. Number 1, genocide. And of course, the Baron sees that in terms of labour. Waste an entire workforce. And you're getting a wee bit of hints of the Nazis here, aren't you? Arbeit macht frei, this kind of thing. Work will set you free. Genocide, or abandon your dear nephew Rabban. That's the Baron asks, what's your alternative? What is your alternative? Abandon your dear nephew Rabban. And he broke off and stared at Hawat. Now, I suppose commit genocide or abandon. I was thinking there's got to be another way. Is it he just goes to genocide? I don't know. It's an extreme, isn't it? And I suppose abandoning your nephew is a lot easier than killing 10 million people. So at this point, I kind of, as I said, reading this in a linear fashion, going through each chapter the same way you guys might read it. I've just put, is this for revenge on Rabban and the Baron here? What's Hawat up to? And this is his revenge in a way. Send him no more troops, no aid of any kind. Don't answer his messages, other than to say you've heard of the terrible way he's handled things on Arrakis, and you intend to take corrective measures as soon as you're able. I'll arrange to have some of your messages intercepted by Imperial spies. Of course, the Baron says, but what of the spice, the revenues that demand your baronial profits, but be careful how you make your demands. Require fixed sums of Rabban. And the Baron turned his hands palm up. But how can I be certain that my weasel nephew isn't? We will have our spies on Arrakis. Tell Rabban he either meets the spice quotas you set him, or he'll be replaced. So as much as abandon your dear nephew Rabban, I suppose it's a death sentence, really, isn't it? And what of the money? What of the spice revenues? You'll get basically how it's saying demand your cut here, but make sure it's a fixed number, and that way nothing looks dodgy. And of course, the Baron says, I know my nephew. This would only make him oppress the population even more. And this kind of was his plan, I suppose, wasn't it? But maybe not to this degree. Of course he will, snapped Hawat. You don't want that stopped now. You merely want your own hands clean. Let Rabban make your Salusa Secundus for you. There's no need to say, my handwriting. There's no need even to send him any prisoners. He has all the population required. If Rabban is driving his people to meet your spice quotas, then the Emperor need suspect no other motive. That's reason enough for putting the planet on the rack. And you, Baron, will not show by word or action that there's any other reason for this. Pardon me. Milk the spice, kill the people, basically. And of course, the Baron, we're told, could not keep the sly tone of admiration out of his voice. Ah, Hawat, you are a devious one. Now, how do we move into Arrakis and make use of what Rabban prepares? That's the simplest thing of all, Baron. If you set each year's quota a bit higher than the one before, matters will soon reach a head there. Production will drop off. You can remove Rabban and take over yourself to correct the mess. I suppose the quotas being yearly, it would take a few years for them to stack up, wouldn't it? So again, probably long-term plans here. I suppose the admiration of the Baron here. What a great plan. We'll not commit genocide, but yeah, we'll crush these people. And I don't know about you guys, but this is another one of the flaws, I think, within Dune, is this. If we're going to send Rabban to crush these, oppress the Fremen, and then the idea is send in Feyd to rescue the Fremen, I just, this guy's, Rabban's brother. I don't honestly think that if one Harkonnen had oppressed the people in a certain way, that if another one turned up and killed that Harkonnen and went, ta-da, I am in charge, I don't think they're really going to look at him in any different light, to be honest with you. Or back Big Mac and Frank. Very good. For the Baron, that would be, yeah, I could go with that one. Factor. Factor number percent and the Atreides distaff. Sorry, just backing up a couple of comments. That the Atreides distaff and spears work in the village to rise and fall on its own merit. Some might be minor houses trusted with monopolies. That's kind of what I it's not really sort of said, but I figured probably that's what the minor houses were. If you see, lesser cousins, this kind of thing. Russian prisons are the worst. I wouldn't know. I haven't been in one. I'd imagine they're pretty bad. Prison's a prison. I suppose you can make one in your own mind. Yeah. Can't keep that sly tone of admiration out of his voice. So that's it. Just basically put Rabban's, how it sounds, put the quotas that you're going to have a fixed amount that you require from Rabban each year as your cut of the spice revenue. Set a fixed figure so that it's not going to vary, and then put it up a little bit each year. And the idea is that as I suppose things get worse and worse for Rabban, as he tries to get spice, it won't suggest that they're not trying to do anything other than get spice, if you see what I mean, and that the Baron will come in and fix it to correct the mess. It fits. I can feel myself. Here we go. This is the Baron's comment. And again, this is the lineup with Feyd, I suppose. It fits, but I can feel myself tiring of all this. I'm preparing another to take over Arrakis for me. So Hawat studied the fat face across from him. Slowly, the old soldier spy began to nod his head. He's got Feyd-Rautha. So that's the reason for the oppression now. You're very devious yourself, Baron. Perhaps we can incorporate these two schemes. Yes, your Feyd-Rautha can go to Arrakis as their savior. He can win the population. Yes. And it is interesting that I suppose both the Atreides and House Harkonnen's backup plan is to rely on one of their scions or scions, if you like, to be a savior, a hero to these people. And it's as I always often said, that I don't think it's a pity that Leto the First isn't around at this point in the book to keep up that comparison, if you like, between him and the Baron. But I think they're very similar indeed. Just in their real thinking, if you like. And the Baron, of course, he's not so slow, is he? Smiled, and behind his smile, he asked himself, now, how does this fit in with Hawat's personal scheming? So he knows he's got Hawat, and he knows that surely there's something personal in here. How does it fit in? And of course, the Baron's main hope here is that Hawat's desire for revenge and his hatred, etc., is aimed at the Emperor, not the Baron. I think otherwise none of this would be happening, would it? How does it fit in with Hawat's personal scheming? And it's a very good question, because Hawat's definitely up to something, isn't he? And we might be able, possibly, as we've talked about, Hawat's skills, etc. Hawat's competence as a master of assassins, a person who runs the security of a household or of a planet, basically. What's he up? We've not been too impressed by him so far. We have to kind of wonder, is he going to redeem himself here at this point in the book? So that's it. I suppose within that, Hawat, at this point, there's no need for words. He can see that he's dismissed. He arose and left the red-walled room, and as he walked, he could not put down the disturbing unknowns that cropped into every computation about Arrakis, their new religious leader. And we're told that Gurney Halleck had hinted about from his hiding place among the smugglers. So we know that Gurney's alive. I suppose we've kind of heard this from Paul, with possible visions, not really being sure if he is or not. This new religious leader that Gurney Halleck has hinted about from his hiding place amongst the smugglers. So we now know where Gurney's at, and that he's alive. And this Muad'Dib, aha! So we know, of course, but these characters don't know. And Hawat's thoughts here are, perhaps I should not have told the Baron to let this religion flourish. Flourish where it will, even among the folk of Pan and Graben. But it's well known that repression makes religion flourish. Perhaps I should not have told the Baron to let this religion flourish, yet at the same time, there's something paradoxical about that. Raban's going to oppress them, isn't he? So repression makes a religion flourish, as we've just been told here. And he was told he thought about Halleck's reports on Fremen battle tactics. And we're told that they smacked of Halleck himself and Idaho, and even of Hawat. And I suppose at that question you must ask yourself, well, who is this person that's been trained probably by the Duke's War Masters? They've got Halleck's training by the looks of it. They've got Duncan Idaho's, some of his style about him, and even mine. What individual has been taught by these three people? And of course, I suppose he goes where it shouldn't. Did Idaho survive? No. But this was a futile question. He did not yet ask himself if it's possible Paul had survived. He probably just doesn't want to ask it. He knew that the Baron was convinced that all Atreides were dead. And here we go. The Bene Gesserit witch had been his weapon. The Baron admitted it. That's a lie. We were talking about this earlier. The Baron lied to him. And how hasn't he factored this in, that the Baron would probably lie and omit information from him? We're told that it could only mean an end to all, even to the woman's own son. And I've just framed this last wee bit with his hatred of Jessica. What a poisonous hate she must have had for the Atreides. Something like the hate I hold for this Baron. Will my blow be as final and complete as hers? So, of course, as much as it seems that Thufir Hawat is on the ball here. He's been lied to. He has missing information. And most of all, I suppose, he's still operating under the assumption that the Atreides were betrayed by one of their own. And that he's in communication with Gurney Halleck about this, as we'll see. So there we go, folks. I piled through that there because it's almost all dialogue. And that's, goodness, that was fast tonight, wasn't it? It's possibly the quickest we've ever done. It's simply put one of the shortest chapters in the book. I don't think it's even 8 pages. And And we just started off book 3. I think we've had as I was saying, it was nice to have a couple of short chapters. But then I think we're going to pile into them a bit. They're going to get a bit, next one's got a bit of meat to it. As do most of them, I think, as we head in to the end of the book. And then, of course, the last chapter is pretty big. So there you go. It's one of those ones where we get a few wee things as we go through it. There's, I suppose, the usual sort of look at the Baron as fat, gross, a pig, degenerate, all of these kind of things. We get that hatred of emotion from Hawat, and insulting, if you like. It starts with an insult. This gross and degenerate pig. And I suppose both men have kind of thoughts to their previous other halves, if you like. Hawat's thinking about Leto, and even the old Duke Baron's thinking about Peter. As Cynthia was pointing out earlier, it's kind of nice in a way that these guys, it fleshes the characters out a wee bit, doesn't it? It's not just that a character's dead, but I wish he was still here, this kind of thing. And it's just interesting that it's something that the Baron and Hawat have in common. And I think what Cynthia was saying previously about where previous time we had the Baron, Feyd, and Peter, and then we've kind of had Feyd, the Baron, and Hawat here, I suppose, if you think about it. They're like a kind of opposite of the Trinity, if you like, of the where we're talking about the female goddess archetypes, those kind of things. And especially the three, if you like, at the start, which is, I suppose, it's Paul, Jessica, and Gaius, Helen, and Mohiam, if you like. And it's just interesting the way that the aspects of those trinities are presented, But so it's a few more little things, particularly statistics and the body count. But within this chapter, what do we say? 165,000 people die in this chapter. There you go. And not without a bat of an eyelid, if you see what I mean. And that's Fremen, Harkonnens, and Sardaukar. Large body count in this chapter. And we don't see a single person die. Which, again, it's an anti-war book, isn't it? And we don't really... Yeah, I think as you were pointing out earlier, something about the fact that the Baron has lied to him. Let's catch up with your comments, folks. So this says, why does the Emperor allow any single house, Atreides or Harkonnen, to play out their exploitive ambitions in a place with the most valuable substance in the universe? Doesn't make economic sense. I suppose emperors are lazy people, though, aren't they, Cynthia? The person at the head sits there while all the wealth flows in. It's not like they would want to take control, I think. But it's a very good point. Why give any one house that power? The smart thing would be to rotate it, wouldn't it? I'll give the Harkonnen 20 years on Arrakis, do that, make a bit of profit. It would actually make all the different houses more loyal, more subservient to the Emperor, because they would actually have to fight or barter for, or bid for, if you like, the right to exploit the most valuable substance in the universe. There's aspects about the book that don't make economic sense at all, Cynthia. And ultimately, whatever we think about melange translates to salaries. It translates to money. And there's all sorts of things to wonder about melange. How perishable is it? That kind of thing. Fact, it says neither Landsraad Guild nor Sisterhood would allow that. Yeah, there's checks and balances, isn't there, within the political structure? Excuse me, I've got an itchy foot. There we go. Of the universe. I don't know. It is interesting. I suppose here in the UK we've just got a new king. I don't think he's been crowned yet, has he? But he goes straight to the church and straight to the military. That's his power base, of course. But it's not really. Because it's actually their wealth, land and money are the royal family's power base in the UK. Pardon me. Particularly, they get a lot of money from the land ownership that they have that they obviously took it from and murdered other people for a long time ago. Lord Crunk says, if the House handles spice mining well, the Emperor can take credit for the placement. If the House mismanages spice mining, the Emperor can exercise his Sardaukar and then take a different credit. That's correct. Sardaukar descendants worship Leto II. Says Factor non-verbal. As I said, it's one of our mysteries, and within Dune, but we kind of and there's also ideas within here. I suppose if we go back to Frank's ideas, but we're getting the I suppose the idea of the survival of the fittest within this, and I suppose it's being held to a kind of literal sense, if you like. I've often said it's what makes something fit isn't necessarily strength or toughness or these kind of things. But yeah, it's a very, very short read. I think it's a very nifty chapter in terms of the back and forth between Hawat and Baron. Between Hawat and the Baron. Let me see. As it tidies up a few things and it sets up a few more. And I said, even with the previous chapter, starting off book 3, who is this prophet? We're getting to see it from the bad guy's point of view a wee bit, if you like. And we've got these outrageous, figures. But it's all very casual, isn't it? And I suppose, as somebody points out, how can you just lose how can the Emperor lose 100,000 men and nobody notice? And if we're told that all of these Sardaukar live the lives of the most exalted of the minor houses, then there surely is 100,000, Sardaukar houses that aren't going to have Sardaukar going back to meet their women folk, their slaves, etc., their wealth. Well, 100,000 people is a sizable body of people, isn't it? So I just think it's interesting that especially whenever we do get to Dune Messiah, as we tear through this book, we probably don't notice little things like the statistics, how people die. We've been doing little skulls here and there. But this is the first time, I suppose. There you go. That's based on the 5-1, the Sardaukar. I didn't want to start drawing 100,000 skulls, but we're just keeping up. I suppose it's a wee thing to always point out and notice to see how it goes within the book. So it's a very short, punchy chapter, and it's creating intrigues for us. What is Hawat really up to? And how, I suppose, how's the Baron? Is the Baron going to move against the Emperor? How is he going to manipulate Raban? Is he going to put Feyd in place? And of course, this is all going to line up with this new religious leader on Arrakis. And of course, we've jumped 2 years. And of course, the previous chapter we'd had this conversation about a new religion. Is it a new religious leader on Arrakis? And was it Feyd not really thinking too much of it, but it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose, yes, it is. From the Baron, it is interesting, and it's if anybody's learned anything about religious leaders over history, fanatical religious leaders are people that we should pay attention to, because they can cause trouble. But there we go. I think that's the shortest. I've got 38 notes on that. That's absolutely the shortest chapter we've had so far, I think. That means I'm in for plenty of work for next time. So there we go. Sardaukar descendants worship Leto II. I'm finished. An hour and 20 minutes we've been going. That is definitely the quickest. So there we go. Yeah, folks. Thank you very much for joining me as always. As I said, and Cynthia in particular, thank you very much for that letter. Love to hear your comments and thoughts on these chapters as we go. It's very obvious that I miss stuff whenever, God knows how many times I've read these books. There's something always fresh, and there's something that we don't quite see, or something that we don't get. And it's absolutely fantastic when somebody brings another set of eyes to the page and picks up on something that I didn't, or, that someone, this kind of thing. It's really great, and it really helps build up this work, I think. Makes it more fun when we've got other people interacting as well. Saves me from doing all the talking all the time. Well, listen, folks, I'm going to wrap it up tonight because my throat was a wee bit sore, and I've done so much reading this week that my eyes are absolutely wrecked. I've gone and bought some new eye drops. So sorry for a very quick one tonight, but it is just piling through a chunk of dialogue and opening up a few little paths within the story, bringing a couple of other things more neatly together, I suppose, tying up a couple of loose ends. And that was it. I suppose just that thing. I'm trying to think about that was just the ideas of the survival of the fittest with the Sardaukar, Salusa Secundus, and of course we know that the Fremen had been there. There's almost a suggestion. It's the second place on the Zen Sunni Wanderers migrations, and there's slaves there for 9 generations, and you're kind of wondering, is there a connection between I suppose the point where we're at now, we always have to ask, what's the connection between the Emperor, the Sardaukar, and the prison planet, this kind of thing. But if the Fremen were there, is there a connection between the Fremen and the Sardaukar? That's an interesting one to think about. And there's a few things in this chapter that just don't make sense, as we've pointed out a couple of them there. We've got this question of where did House Corrino originate. I suppose if that's in ignorance, how it doesn't know and the Baron doesn't know, that's one, fair enough. But it is answered for us in the back of the book. Certainly the Emperor's reasoning as presented by Hawat to the Baron, why the Emperor turned against House Atreides, does not make sense. Based on, as I said, it's like a non sequitur. The events don't line up, if you see what I mean. If he did this because of that, then this hasn't happened yet, if you see what I mean. So that's a problem. And we don't encounter too many of them in a book that's this complicated and not complicated, but this complex and I suppose voluminous book. There's an awful lot here, so we don't see too many wee mistakes. And some we have to ask ourselves: are they mistakes, or is this based on what the characters know, or characters saying and manipulating? I suppose in the situation, if that makes any sense. But we just had a couple of that doesn't quite add up, I think. And I'm wondering, is Hawat, just that last part, what a poisonous hate she must have had for the trees, something like the hate I hold for this Baron. And I'm assuming that his hate for the Emperor must be greater. Either that, or he doesn't really buy it, and it is the Baron that he's out. Will my blow be as final and complete as hers? And I'm just wondering at the end of that, how much, because mentats get flustered, don't they, very easily when you how much is his hatred affecting his computations? Because if, for all of us who don't know, I suppose when you're angry, full of hate, full of wrath, all of that stuff, you don't think correctly, do you? Your brain actually shuts all sorts of things down, So there we go. Interesting, fast, and very quick little chapter. So there you go, folks. I'm going to sign off and go get myself a beer and chill out for a wee bit. In fact, it says, Shaddam was such an oaf and Salusa mismanagement. He was afraid an Atreides would be asked to lead like he had happened in the past. And Lord, thanks all. See it says Lord Crunk. And then Cynthia says, thanks. Give your eyes a rest if possible. I don't even know what I've got with the eye drops around here somewhere. But yeah, I've just done just for my students. I've done an awful lot of reading this week, and I've got a Shakespeare play to read as well for Tuesday. The joy of it. Shaddam was such an oath and Salusa mismanagement. He's afraid of Atreides would be asked to lead like it had happened in the past. It's in the Dune appendix. Thank you, Factor. Well, we're heading towards them, aren't we? I can't wait to get there. Yeah, interesting. Looking forward to it. Actually, that's going to be a bit of fun. We're heading to the end of the book, and I think it's a very strong ending, this book. And there's plenty more to go. It's one of those things where you say I'm heading towards the end of the book, and the end of the book is the size of another novel, if you see what I mean. So there's plenty to go. But yes, looking forward to it. And so we're on chapter 40 next time. And hopefully, folks, again, we'll go with the Thursday. And if I can get the job done early enough, I might even go for 9 o'clock. But it's got to the point where I think me attempting to give any time schedules it's becoming a joke, hasn't it? So I'll go with the days, and we'll not worry too much about the times. But hopefully, we'll definitely try to see you again on Thursday, either 9 or 10 p.m. Depending on if I get this done in time. Generally, I've got some students, you see, just prior to this. So we'll be back on Thursday with chapter 40. And in the meantime, just say thank you all so much for joining in and for your interactions and for being here. And I hope you're all taking good care of yourselves. Time doesn't exist, so no worries. Time is an illusion. In fact, at lunchtime, doubly so. I'll leave you with that one. And remember that no matter where you go, there you are. So all the very best, folks. Look after yourselves. I'll say good night, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you and goodbye. Cheers.